Does everyone just have a mountain of stuff like me? Today I'm going to show you how I built the ultimate DIY garage storage solution. One that's cost effective, it's mobile, and most importantly for me, it won't eat up my precious wall space. I'm definitely not the first to build something like this. There are tons on the internet, but with a few clever tweaks, I think I've made this version more functional, at least for my needs. Whether you're a woodworker, a hobbyist, or someone with a mountain of stuff to organize, this build is for you. Number one was cost effectiveness, because we're building a shop, as you can see, so the budget's a little tight. This project won't break the bank. Number two, it's mobile. Again, the shop isn't fully set up yet, so I might need to move this to wherever it makes the most sense. Number three, it has to be easy access. No more ladders, no more crawling into attics. You know exactly what's in every box at a glance, and it's not ugly. Because let's face it, most garage storage looks terrible. It also doubles up as wall space savings for hanging tools, bikes, or anything else you need to keep off the ground. This build could be your solution. Marie Kondo hasn't gotten to me yet, so let's get started. My name is Nick, and this is Design is Blank. I have no idea what kind of tools you have. I have an old miter saw, and I'm going to be using that. You can do this with a circular saw, even a hand saw if you have enough energy. You could do it on a table saw with a crosscut sled. There's a lot of ways to do it, but in this case, I need to cut the runners for the hanging totes. And what I need for my plans are 27-inch pieces. And I have 8-foot 2x3s to work with. You can also use 2x2s. I needed 11 of them because you get 3 out of one 8-foot length. So you do the math. Hopefully I'm getting that right. And one trick that I have, because I don't have a complicated setup with stop blocks, I just cut my length exactly 27 inches for the first one. I mark that piece, and I keep using that original piece. Just butt up my other piece against the blade and cut it to match. That is the way that I'm doing this 32 different times. So I obviously won't show you that 32 times, but once again, it's 27 inches, and the template is really important there. So do whatever you got to do, but get 32 of them, all the same. So there you go, 32, exactly the same. Now I'm going to move on to my 84-inch vertical pieces. These are the pieces that make the ladders, I guess, if you will. You're going to cut these down at 84 inches. This is the exact same process as before. So I needed 10 of those. These are essentially the vertical parts of the ladder. And I only have one work table, so I have to put my miter saw on the floor. That little block, by the way, is something that matches the height of my miter saw, so it makes it a little easier with long pieces. So now what I'm doing is I'm making essentially a template for all of my ladder pieces. Now the math is essentially that I want these 16.5 inches apart vertically so that there is 1.5 inches between each of the totes. If they sag a tiny bit, which these are very rigid, I know that's a common concern that hanging them is not good. I have a solution for some of the heavier bins, but basically, trust me when I say you want 16.5 inches apart. That gives you 1.5 inches between. And from the bottom of this story stick that I have here that will allow me to make all of my ladder pieces the same, I have a 15-inch, a 31.5-inch, a 48-inch, a 64.5-inch, and an 81-inch mark. That is the 5-high column that I'm going to have at the end of the day. So I used a square just to make sure my marks are good and dark and straight. And then I brought in my other pieces, and I essentially just lined them up and transferred those marks to them. Once again, this was by far the slowest process of this build. So go ahead and take your time, make sure that it's right, and then you can bring your runners back and basically screw them down. I made a simple drilling jig template, which is completely unnecessary, but it allows your screw pattern to look uniform. And I'd say it didn't slow me down too much, but do whatever you want to do here and make these ladders. Now, the outside ladders have your runners on just one side because on the outside, you're not going to have a tote floating there magically. So do those first, and then work on the double-sided ones. These are the 3 interior ladders that will support totes from both sides. It's essentially the exact same process, just when you're done with the one side, flip it over and screw on runners right where they go to match. Now there'll be a space in between, and that will come in handy at a later step. So while this is probably not the most compelling part of the video, I will say that taking your time here, making sure everything is straight and square, will help you in the long run. The 2x4s that I purchased from Home Depot were a little bit less than straight. And while I'm doing this, I was checking to make sure that I could pull things in with the screws as much as possible, and that will just help me down the line. Now you'll notice that I said there are 20 totes in this, but there's only 4 rungs for hanging. And that's because I want the bottom row to sit on essentially a platform, because I know that some totes will be very heavy, and those ones having support at the bottom will be important. So anyway, moving on. I need a spacer that is 20¼ inches, and this is going to be the space between each of my ladders. That will give me enough room width-wise for those totes. And if I haven't said it already, I'm using the Home Depot clear plastic totes. They also make the black ones. I definitely prefer the clear, especially because of how we're going to conceal these in the future. You can just look at them and see what's in them. You don't need complicated setups. It's not critical that they're hidden because, I'm going to put this on wheels and hide it. So more on that in a second. So I basically cut 4 of these spacers. I'm going to use them continually throughout this project to make sure everything stays square. I laid all my ladders on the ground. I spaced them out accordingly. And then I took my base pieces. These pieces are cut at 88¾ inches. And that will give you the exact spread for 4 columns, essentially. The 4 columns, you need 4 2x4s to make up the front, back, and on the top and the bottom. So I use a scrap piece of 2x4, and I'm using this to mark my pieces as well, so that I know that I'm coming close to the right marks. So that outside one is my outside ladder. Then my 20¼ inches away will be the next vertical ladder piece that you can see there in the background, and so forth. And they're all the way down the front and back sides. So I actually ended up starting with the top. And one trick I have is, if you're working by yourself, take the center post and screw that in first. And that will, as soon as you get one screw in and it's flush and level, then you don't need another hand to hold. I've seen people do stuff with clamps. I've seen people try to screw on the end first. This is the easiest way for sure, so trust me. Now I'm doing the outside, and I'm just screwing right through the end grain with 3-inch screws. I bought my screws on Amazon because it was ridiculous how expensive screws are getting at Home Depot. But the coated deck screws are a little bit more annoying to use. If I was going to do this again, I would use the standard construction screws with the cutting tip. That almost means you don't really have to pre-drill, and getting started into the wood is like instant. These coated screws, the epoxy on the outside or whatever it is that they use, kind of makes them not cut. So it's a little bit annoying, but yeah. So after I had the tops and bottoms on, I lifted this whole structure up just to see, and there it is. I guess I didn't have all of them on. I need to put this one on. So I used my spacers again, and I jammed them in to combat the warping 2x4s. This helped a lot because you see that clamp that I have on the side. That outside piece wanted to be too far apart, and it was making it hard on me. And since I'm working by myself, I put the spacers at the top runners, and that really gave me a perfect fit, essentially. They were really in there, though, as you can see. And then I moved them to the bottom and jammed them in there just to confirm that everything was square. And this 2x4 was actually twisted extremely out of square. So with all the spacers in place, it actually forced it back to being straight and square, and then I was able to screw into the bottom. I don't know if I covered that explicitly on camera, but that's what was happening there.
These 2x4s are really twisted, but after I jammed all these in, it kind of forces them straight. Now they're a little bit short here, so I'm going to use a clamp after I tilt it back down. But otherwise, everything is square.
Now I tip this thing back down to do a few things. I want to make this entire thing mobile. And the way I'm going to do that is by using these casters that are locking, and I bought them on Amazon, once again, due to cost reasons. These are pretty great. I've used these for a lot of different projects, and I'll put a link in the description for those. You can find them on my Amazon store as I struggle to get this thing to the ground. It's possible, obviously, to lift as one guy. I'm not in the best of shape right now, and I was still able to do it. And once I put it down on its back, I was able to finalize the last few screws that I didn't get in place. In order to attach the casters, I wanted to connect the front and back with a scrap piece of 2x6. And you can see that this was used as concrete framing materials for our shop, actually. And I pre-drilled some holes based on the plates that are on the casters. And this really stiffened up the build. I would say it's probably not 100% required, but I really like being able to bolt the crap out of these, and I use some pretty heavy-duty 3-inch lag screws to secure the wheels because I want them to not snap off under load. So you can see me blasting those in here with the impact driver, and these are locking in both directions, these casters, the pivot and the rotation. Is that the right terminology? I don't know. But yeah, put these in. They are very secure and very much on there. And this also now gives me a lip for creating a bottom platform. I'll get to that in a second as you watch me apparently slowly screw these in. You get the point. So speeding it up a little bit, now you can kind of see the 2x6s on either side there. And I'm putting one more in the middle. At this point, I wasn't totally sure if I was going to be able to get away with 4 wheels or if I needed 6. And when I put it all together, the way this is constructed, I felt that the span, which is nearly 8 feet, was a little bit too wide, and eventually it was going to sort of sag in the middle. Maybe it wouldn't, but I'm the overbuild it and don't worry about it again type of guy. So I ordered a second set of these wheels, and I prepared the piece, but I didn't have them on this day. So that middle section is going to get 2 more wheels in just a moment. So I popped it back up just to see that everything worked out. I was getting my squat lifts or whatever the hell you call that in. And the locking wheels in this case really help so that it doesn't just run away from me there. I lifted this thing up and down a few more times than I needed to on this project. And after testing that it rolled okay and then sliding in one of these bins at the bottom, I noticed that the bin wasn't sitting flat. So I got the shipment from Amazon and I had the wheels now, so I brought it back down again, put it on the ground, and installed another set of wheels. This was again to prevent any kind of bowing that was happening. I don't have a vertical piece that might hold all of this together. So I put some sheathing on the back. I'm using OSB here to keep the cost down. I thought originally I was going to have some to use from the siding, and I actually didn't. And I was curious, the cost of plywood is more expensive. The look of OSB is crap, but it's cheaper.
What?
So, weigh your own options there. I ended up going with OSB. Obviously, it has some quirks. So I do plan to paint this and actually try to play with the texture a little bit to see if it's worth it. And this is an optional step. So you could obviously lay these things down and trace it with a pen and then cut it with a circular saw or a track saw or a table saw, any number of tools. I chose to just lay it down and use my trim router with a templating bit. This is something I do a lot in woodworking, and I feel like it gives me a perfect result every single time, even if things aren't 1000% square. So the bearing follows the edge, obviously, for those who aren't woodworkers, and cuts that off. So this might be a specialty tool that you don't have. So cut it, place it on there, trace it, and then cut it with another tool. Now lifting it was starting to get a little bit tiresome because this OSB added a lot of weight, and I don't know if this is the last time I put it down that way, but it was giving me a run for my money now. So still doable. So I brought these bins over, and normally when you store these, they lock into each other, but the problem is you'd have to lift all of them off to access the bottom ones. That's why hanging them is more ideal. So I wanted to test that these things fit and worked relatively well with all of the structure in place at this point. So I put them in, one in each row to start. I actually don't even have 20 of these yet, but I'll be buying them shortly so that I can guarantee that I have a full set here. Now you can see the one on the bottom's kind of leaning back. The siding doesn't let it go and span across the 2x4s, so I needed to come up with a solution for that. When I spin this around, you can see now I'm concealing all of the storage, and I have actually even more floor space. So looking at all these prices is what determined my OSB choice. I got a few extra sheets, and I added this piece to the bottom underneath those bins so that the bottom row can just sit on the ground, essentially, or on these pieces, so that the heaviest bins will stay at the bottom and give this thing more support, but also won't bow to a crazy degree and make it hard to get out. So it's a hybrid of what a lot of people say. Building a shelving system this size is a lot of extra work. Just the wood there, whoops. And I don't know. I just think this is a better option. A combo. Most of the stuff is actually not that heavy. So I ripped that OSB down. This is going to be used for the sides. And I did this over a couple of days, just when I could spend a little bit of time. We're also getting inspections actively. And as I said before, I prefer to leave things long and then come back and use my router to trim things up flush. It's really satisfying when it works well, but this router is a little bit underpowered to blast through the OSB in one shot. So I gave it some hell. But if you got a more powerful router, it probably works a little bit better. I routed all the surfaces that met up with the side pieces as well as the top. I am going to be putting a solid plywood top on top of this, believe it or not. I have some leftover plywood. It's 1/2 inch, and that's what I'm going to go with. So after flush trimming these, I know I have a perfect edge. I clamped on some scrap pieces of wood to help me hold my OSB at the right height. This is a helpful tip when you're working by yourself. And I chose to line up the front edge as best I could because that's a factory edge. And then I just screwed it down. And obviously leaving the edge proud as I have done before, I had to come back and trim it. Then I needed some support for the top piece. This was one of those 20 1/4 pieces that I used for spacing earlier. And in the center ladder, I wanted to put a vertical 2x4 right up there. And I used a pipe clamp so that I can tighten it down while I toe screw in from the bottom.
So that when I screw in through here, it doesn't move. Sometimes when you toenail or toe screw, it moves a little bit, and I need it to be flush because this is going to support my top.
And then I fired some screws in from the bottom and came back from the top side as well, just to secure this piece. This is essentially a nailer and support for the middle section. I've seen a lot of these builds, and a lot of people slap on plywood just spanning across the top, even using OSB sometimes, and that is definitely going to sag. You can see this is from my wedding. I cut these pieces down because I don't really need them anymore, and 2 pieces at the 27-inch mark were more or less good to go. I left them a little bit long because, as you know, I love my little trim router. Pop my track saw on. Again, I have the tools, so I'm using them. I'm a woodworker, and I have a full set of tools, but you could easily do this with the circular saw. I'm just fancy like that. The track saw is great because you literally just draw your lines and put the track right where you want it to cut. They do make battery-powered ones, which will have you avoid the annoying cord snags that seem to happen every time. But I've got one cut. I'm going to take it off camera for a second just to check that it fits and I didn't screw something up. Then I brought it back to use to mark for the second one because it worked well. I'm going to use my track saw one more time and cut the second piece. Again, I'm using a lot of found material on this project, but I will give you the full list of required materials and cut list in the description, but only if you want me to, because I'm not going to do this work if no one's going to watch this video, and I really don't know how this video will perform. So if you really want to build this and you let me know that you want plans for it, I will make the plans. So that's how we're going to do it. Let me know in the comments. Walking all the way around my scrap wood pile and getting up on the ladder to put these pieces in, I screwed them down to the 2x4s and I flush trim them as you've seen me do probably more times than you care to. These stickers were on my OSB, and they're the kind of stickers when you peel them you just get like half an inch at a time, and it's really annoying. The tip for this is to use a heat gun, and if you have a heat gun on hand, you can heat up the adhesive, use a chisel or use some kind of scraping device, and they will come off, maybe not in one piece, but they'll come off pretty clean, and then you can go ahead and paint your OSB, or if you had the good fortune of just sucking it up and buying plywood and spending the extra money, you can skip the step of trying to hide all of the marks that are all over OSB. Why do they have to put so many marks? I used Zinsser 123. This is really important if you want to paint OSB. OSB has tons of resin and other weird crap that will seep through most primers. I've used Kills as well before in the past. Both are common brands. Kills is pretty thick and sometimes it works. I've found that Zinsser 123 is slightly better for this. I am putting a heavy coat of primer on top of the graphics and the splatter that was on this piece for some reason, and I'm rolling it out. But the thing is, I'm probably going to skim coat this to make it look a little bit better. Okay, this holds 20 of these 27-gallon totes, not including the top, so if you've got taller ceilings, you can store more stuff up there. And technically, you get 54 more inches of wall space. I'm gonna put French cleats on mine to hang some tools. You can hang bikes, you can hang all kinds of other stuff up there.
whatever works for you. This is the first project in the new shop. As you can see, we are still working on walls and other things related to the building. But soon we'll be building this out into a dream shop. So if you want to see that, you got to hit the buttons so that my videos come up for you in the future. Thanks, my name is Nick, and this is Designs Blind. Bye.